So one of the benefits of cinema cameras is they have a lot more physical controls. And while the FX30 isn't, you could consider it not a cinema camera, it does have a lot of custom buttons that are already set to very useful things. But here's four that I think is really worth changing that make things a lot easier. I'm just going to take it out of this whole rig situation though. Also, if you want a full breakdown of my settings and custom buttons, there is a full video that I did when I first got it. It's mostly the same. I have changed a couple things, but it's mostly the same. So go check that out if you're interested. But the first one we're going to talk about today is the ISO button. When you first get the FX30, it has this button right here set to ISO. It even has it written on the body, custom button 3. It is set to pull up the ISO menu, which sure, that's useful, unless you just set a dial to ISO like I do on both my Sony cameras. If there's an extra dial there, why not just set it to ISO? So not only have I done that, but also because I shoot in Cine EI, it's not actually that useful because I'm not changing ISOs all the time, or at least not scrolling through the whole range. Because I'm shooting in Cine EI, which is sort of a feature that the alpha cameras don't have, but the FX ones do. And that's where it basically locks to the two base ISOs and you can just switch between them. So that's what I changed the button to do. When I press the ISO button, it'll switch between 800 and 2500 ISO, or technically it's 800 and 2500 EI, but it's the same thing. And you can still change the EI at that base, but then the base ISO will actually stay the same. It just basically moves the dynamic range up and down rather than moving the actual exposure. So not only does that make it easier to switch between those two base ISOs, it means you're also going to get basically the best dynamic range and noise performance all the time because you're not going at those in-between ISOs. Like ISO 2000 is not going to look as good as 2500 because that's how dual base ISO works. The next button that I think is very useful to change, and I have it set to the custom button 4 down here, and I have that set to LUT on and off. So I can have my own LUT, or you can have a bunch of LUTs in here. You could even just use the built-in S709 LUT, but it means you can just press a button to turn on and off that monitoring LUT so you can see either your S-Log3 footage as it normally looks, or press that button and then you have a basically fully graded, or at least Rec 709 looking image on your LCD screen and or on your monitor. And unless your monitor has a button that you can set to switch the LUT, which the LUT 7 that I had on here from Field World, that does have a button that I can set to put on the LUT. But one thing I've noticed is turning on the LUT in camera versus turning on the same LUT in any of my monitors, none of them look as good as when it's turned on in camera. So I always prefer to do it in camera rather than in the monitor. The next one is going to be the down button on the D-pad here. Now the other directions on the D-pad I leave as peaking and zebras because they are very useful things to be able to turn on and off, so I leave them. But shutter, I don't really change my shutter speed like ever, because if I am going to change frame rates, I'll just change into a different mode with that different frame rate, but I'll usually actually just switch to S&Q mode, which is actually what I have it set to. I have the down button here set to switch to S&Q mode, so it'll just change the mode to S&Q, and I basically leave S&Q in 4K 50 with 1/100 shutter speed, so I also don't need to change the shutter speed because I have it already set in that mode. And then from there I could change to 100 frames per second if I wanted to, and then I would just change the shutter speed then. Now this will become even easier once we get shutter angle in a few months, but that's still a few months away, so you know. But having shutter angle probably isn't going to change how I use this camera all that much because I barely ever change the shutter speed. But if I do, I just have the back dial set to shutter speed, which is what it is by default, but I still basically never touch it. And the last one that I'm going to talk about here is the iris button. So custom button 1 right on the front there is default set to iris, but if I'm shooting on a manual lens like this Nisi Athena 40mm, I don't need to be changing my iris in camera because I can't, because this is cinema lens, it's fully manual. Or even if I was using an autofocus lens, that's what the dial's for on the front. So I've previously had this set to steady shot, where I can turn it off onto standard or onto active, you know, which I used sometimes, but not very often. But now that I'm using cinema lenses, when you don't have a lens that communicates with the camera, the steady shot needs to be set manually by focal length. So I've set that button to set that focal length, because if I change between the 40mm and the 50mm, There's not going to be a huge difference because they are pretty similar, but if I was to change between like a, an 18 and a 135, like, Nisi has in this set, there's going to be a big difference in what the steady shot needs to do. So having that easily adjustable where you don't have to go into menus to change makes it a lot easier. And this would be even more so the case with zoom lenses. I don't have any cinema zooms right now, so that's not an issue for me. I just know that I would 100% forget so much of the time to change the steady shot if I had to go into menus to change it. But pretty much all of the other custom buttons I've actually left to their default settings, like white balance. All the recording buttons, I love having multiple recording buttons, so I left all them the same. But those are the 4 that I think make the biggest difference and that I actually use regularly. So if you haven't considered them, maybe consider them. Doesn't really affect me either way, but in case you were wondering what to set some of those buttons as, there you go. That'll be all for this one. Go check out some of my other FX30 videos up here, do all the other things, and I'll see you next time. Okay, bye.